Hello, friends. I'm no therapist, but I'm your host, Stephanie Goodman. I'm a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a woman of faith. Often friends ask me how I have a successful marriage while blending families and staying optimistic in life. This podcast features people with real-life stories about success in relationships and triumph over trial. Today I get to sit with Utahjazz sports commentator Alema Harrington, along with his brother, a return guest, Tao. Alema talks about his journey from addiction to recovery and the secret he learned to staying recovered. Welcome back to a new edition of I'm No Therapist, but today I have in my studio two brothers who are identical. And one is a broadcaster, a podcaster, and a counselor. You may know him as a sports broadcaster. Him and his brother played in BYU football, and they have some incredible stories I'm excited to share with you. I have Alema.
Yes.
And Tao.
So happy to be here. Thank you. And honored to be here with my brother. We don't get a chance to do this a lot. We work together on different projects, but I think people probably recognize that I'm a guy that you might see at a jazz broadcast or different things, and a lot of times Tao is there, but he's behind the scenes, and I keep him hidden away, so I don't have to compete with him.
That's right.
Yeah, but it's fun to get a chance to be with him, and all the things that you mentioned that I am, broadcaster, podcaster. I'm a licensed counselor in substance use disorder. Went back and got my certification for that about 10 years ago at UVU. And when people ask me, well, something we don't know about you, and to this day, even though it's fairly well known, people don't know that I'm a twin. And when I let them, they go, oh, really? And some of them have run into town. We both have these experiences where, somebody will go start talking to Tao about the jazz.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's like, I don't think I'm who you think I am. But it's been, it's been a great relationship now, 56 years on this earth, and however much time we were together in the pre-existence, 9 months in the womb, and now we're here and living this experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you are very complimentary to each other. This is a relationship that I've been able to get to know a little bit, is the way that you're able to compliment and uplift and encourage each other. I think that's so powerful, especially in a family. I know when I was younger, I wished that I had a twin sister. I think some of us wish that sometimes.
Yeah. I think, you think about siblings that you might have, or if you don't have somebody that's close in your age, and you kind of have that fantasy, man, I wish I had like somebody that would, and we have had that our entire lives. And, we joke that we were, partners from the womb, and to be able to have that type of connection is really, it's just an amazing thing. And interestingly enough, in our class in high school, we had two other sets of twins. One was a boy and a girl. One was two boys that were fraternal. And, they didn't have the same relationship that Tao and I have had. And sometimes it's competitive, and to Tao's credit, he's just such an amazing personality, so loving and giving, and so that's, from my perspective, that's been a lot of what has, allowed our relationship to grow, so.
That's so powerful.
Yeah.
I want to take a minute and recognize that Tao was in our studio before sharing his story. I'm sure that if you go through our old podcasts, you'll find his heartfelt story. And we have been wanting to bring Alema into the studio to be able to share his story as well. So if you don't mind, let's go back into that story. Tell us, where did you grow up?
We grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii. Father Samoan, mother Caucasian. Mom is from here, from Utah. and actually has really strong pioneer roots, and also even in the church. My grandfather on my mother's side, Lynn McKinley, was on the Know Your Religion circuit, and some of his presentations were turned into books. And so we come from a very strong orator, broadcaster type of background. Mm-hmm. He was in theater, and so was my grandmother on my mom's side. And my parents actually met. My father, who was born in Samoa, moved to Hawaii when he was 3, ended up going to Stanford University. He was a legendary, and people, when we talk about athletes, there's different status that you might achieve. He's legendary, my dad is, in Hawaii, or I should say was. He passed away last year. And after he was done at Stanford University playing football there and got his degree, he served a mission in Samoa. And so he was in the Palo Alto, San Francisco area when he returned from his mission, a very successful mission. In fact, the highest baptizing mission in the church when he was there. And when he got back to San Francisco, my mom had been visiting an aunt of hers, and so she was in San Francisco, and they met in church. And as they say, the rest is history. And so we're a product of those two very strong families. My father's family on the Samoan side, very strong in the church, and our great grandfather, Suopia Tuipelehaki, Samasina Tuipelehaki, was one of the first members of the church in Samoa. And so,
really?
In fact, we just had a family reunion. We got to know a little bit more about our history on that side of our family, and but we come from strong roots, and it's a cool thing to get to know where you come from.
Yeah. It makes a difference when you recognize the legacy that's been left in your life.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you come from some real spiritual warriors.
Yeah, I feel guilty of this. We focus so much on our Samoan side or Samoan Tongan side that we don't give the proper credit to my mom's side of the family, who were original pioneers that came across the plains and sacrificed everything to be members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
So you grew up in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
When was it that you started your career of football?
Well, it's kind of I don't know if Tao told this story before, but Tao and I were, on the smaller side. And my father being this legend in Hawaii, and we went to the same high school that he went to. And so, I think my father felt like there was probably some pressure, maybe some expectations that we might feel, and out of maybe, a courtesy to us and not put us through that, he didn't have us play football growing up. Huh. And so we didn't play Little League in Hawaii. It's Pop Warner football, and we played tennis, and enjoyed that. And my dad was our coach. We like to joke around that he coached us right out of tennis. And I think he learned from that experience. He said, I'm not coaching these kids. I'm just not built for that. Huh. And my dad's a great athlete. He's a great coach. He's a great motivator, a great orator, and all of those things. But sometimes when it's your own children, it doesn't work. And so I think that he felt like, I need to just kind of let them do their own thing. But we ended up in 7th grade. There was a 9th grade football team at our high school, and you had to get your parents' signature to, as a waiver. Yeah. And so we didn't want to ask my dad. We're scared, so we forged his signature, and then we started practicing with the team, and then they had cuts, and we made the 9th grade team as 7th graders. And the way my dad would tell the story, he finally came to a game and saw us play, and he was like, "Oh, these kids are going to be okay." So that's where our football careers started. And
who was the influence of moving forward and making these signatures?
It was probably me.
Probably.
Probably
good
not a
twin,
good.
bad twin.
Yeah.
I knew it. This is why we all need a twin in life.
Yes.
Someone to blame on. Wow, that's quite the story. Yeah. So that's how you started in football and found that this was a passion for you?
Yeah, I mean, we enjoyed athletics. Had played basketball, police athletic league, baseball, all of those things growing up. But football was, for both of us, I think, it's always been a great release. And for me to be able, and I think for Tao as well, to be able to hit somebody really hard, felt so good. And so I think we both embraced it from that perspective. We're different, very different I think the way that we contributed to teams. Tao was such an unselfish player that he played wherever we needed him to. He played quarterback, he played safety, he was the fullback in an I formation offense. Is a guy that does a lot of blocking, and I was the I back, and so I'd end up with a lot of statistics, but Tao gets credit for a lot of that, for just the way that he was selfless in his approach, and was always the most inspirational player on the team. That was kind of his role.
Well, Alema gives me a lot of credit, and I mean, he was really, between the two of us, has always been more focused, more talent, had more just natural talent, and more motivation, and I really do get a lot out of that supportive role. But the beautiful thing about a relationship is very complementary. We're not blessed. We have a lot of skills in common, but we have a lot that are different, and so but they're complementary. So I have things that he can't do, or he can do them, but I can do them better, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I would love to think that I could get in front of the camera and kind of talk and do all these things, and when I do, and I watch myself, I go, oh my gosh, I say more than Jen Psaki. But I credit a lot of that to our mom, who was always making sure that we were friends, and that we understood that we were here together for a reason. And she was just phenomenal at that, in helping us to, and so there was never really any competitive nature between us. Yeah. It was always something that was just, we drove each other to greater heights.
Wow. What a blessing to have a friendship like that. And I love that you gave credit to your mother. I know my mother has been very influential in keeping me and my siblings friends. And I hope and pray that someday my children will recognize how valuable a friendship in the family really is. That's powerful. And I want to go into, so you found this love of football, and this is what, high school, junior high? And now you have the opportunity to go into college.
Yeah. I think for us, my father who was, it was never a question like, are you going to go to college or not? It was like, you guys are going to college. He was because of his experience, and even his father's experience, who left Samoa and came to Hawaii originally because of a scholarship that he received. Education was a very important thing. And so the high school that we went to, Punahou High School, is one of the top prep academies in the country. And so we were prepared for college, and understood that we were gonna go to college. And the funny thing is that when you grow up in Hawaii, you hate BYU.
Oh.
Because of the rivalry between those two teams. And so we'd be in the stands at Aloha Stadium, and BYU, Jim McMahon, would be rolling into town, and we're cheering against. My mom's the only one cheering for BYU. And everybody else is like, we're all embarrassed by Mom because she's this big BYU fan. And we're cheering for the University of Hawaii. And then during that time when we were being recruited, BYU was getting everybody out of Hawaii, all the top players. So anybody was, player of the year, and I'd list some names like Kurt Govea, Lakehe Muli, and Thor Salanoa. These guys are all, great athletes in Hawaii, and they all went to BYU. And some of them, like, Kurt Govea wasn't even LDS. And so there was this trend of BYU getting all the top athletes. And so, and everybody knew at the University of Hawaii that we were LDS, that we were Mormon. And so I remember they came and recruited to our school, and were talking to myself and to Tao, and they were just trying to get a feel for it, and they wanted to know, like, are you guys going to go to BYU? And I remember, I don't think we were committed to that, but because, that was, so, and BYU was so good at that time, it almost took the University of Hawaii out of the recruiting mix. And as soon as we told them, well, we're considering going to BYU and we were going to take a recruiting trip, they stopped recruiting us.
Wow.
And so I think they just didn't want to even waste their time and effort to try to get kids that were going to end up at BYU.
Huh.
And so we ended up at Brigham Young University, even though that was, our rival growing up. And then, things change. And then all of a sudden, man, we love BYU.
Wow.
Yeah.
You saw things from a different perspective.
Yeah. And it was great to come up here to BYU from Hawaii because there were so many Polynesian athletes that were here.
Oh.
And whether it's Lake or Vaisakahema, and Robert and I and Louis Wong, there were all these guys that had Hawaii ties or that were Polynesian that embraced us and, kind of made it easier for kids from, Hawaii to come and assimilate because it's not easy. And a lot of kids that leave Hawaii and go to school, whether they're leaving the islands of, Samoa or Hawaii, they get up on the mainland, the continent of the United States and really struggle. My dad did when he left Hawaii to go to Stanford. And, it was his perseverance that I think inspired a kind of a wave of recruiting even during his years. And now we see kids from Hawaii, and I do high school football here. I just did a game with two kids that moved from Maui that are playing for Roy High School. I mean, there's a lot of kids that are coming up now even earlier and getting the exposure here in the state of Utah or California. But for us, it made a lot of sense for us to be at BYU, and we were grateful that the Lavelle Edwards, believed in us enough to say, well, let's, get the twins, and we were kind of a package deal.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I'd love for you to dive into a little bit. You said that it's difficult to come into the mainland. Is it because you feel lost, like you don't have your tribe with you, or share with me?
I think there's a lot of things that are part of it. And one of it is one of those things. I remember when we first came up our freshman year and we were playing on the junior varsity team back when they had JV football, and we were going to play Dixie. And so we got on this bus and we were driving, and I remember thinking, man, where in the world are we going? Because if we had been driving for that long in Hawaii, we'd been around the island twice. It'd be just like, are you kidding me? And so, there's that part of it, which interestingly enough for me, now I understand what rock fever is, because when I go back to Hawaii, I want to be able to go and travel. And, but that's an adjustment. The food is an adjustment. You have people that'll, make you food and that kind of stuff, but the culture is different. And so you come into kind of this from a very Ohana type of experience where there's this cultural, bond that you have and you get to college football and it's a different world. It's competitive and it's cutthroat and it's political and it's all of these things that, I don't speak like this is exclusive to the kids coming from the islands. I think we all have that kind of that wake up call, and it's like, whoo, wow, this just got real.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge, I think, for anybody, that's going through that freshman experience. It can be really hard. But if you're from Hawaii, then I think maybe easier to say, I'm just going to go home, because that's what the problem is, that this is not working, as opposed to like sticking it out, And if you're from Idaho and then going home, it's like you can go home and then you can come back again.
True.
But if you live in Hawaii, then you got to get on the plane and it's like, and unless your parents tell you you're not coming home, then which a lot of parents do, to just make sure that they they push their kids into and say, hey, you're not coming home. It's like, you go there and you make it work. And so
Wow.
that part is an adjustment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to have other people there
Yeah.
that were from your lands was
I think
a little bit of a solid.
that one of the things that Alema's talking about, that, I mean, honestly, I remember coming in and seeing guys that were seriously like giants, you know, Jim Herman, Sean Knight, and Louis Wong and Robert Anai. These were our offensive line and defensive linemen. They were huge. We had not, I mean, even the Hawaii grows them bigger than they used to when we were there. But, you know, when we got here, I was blown away.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that plays with your ego.
Sure.
And your self-esteem.
Yeah.
And I think some of those things led to, you know, part of the story that we'll get into of this insecurity, and like, how do you cope with some of these high expectations that you walk into with that can be dashed, or, you know, you have to have patience, and like, look, you're not going to start this year, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you mean? So I mean, there's a lot that's in there, and I'll let Alema kind of explain what that was like for him. I ended up going on a mission after a first year, and then and maybe that was, you know, some of that was involved. So that was the first time that we were separated, and that was really kind of a tough experience. I went on a mission, Alema didn't, and so that was one of the first times in our lives that we were
The first time, yeah.
Yeah.
In our
Wow.
lives that
And
we were separated.
I think there were a lot of things that happened in that window that kind of led down a dark path.
Yeah.
So let's go into that a little bit. I know that the reason that we're sitting here is for your life story.
Yeah.
So you're involved with football. You're seeing the competition.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to find yourself.
Yeah.
What brought you into a place of experimenting, or how did you go down to a darker place?
And I think it's interesting because, you know, I experimented a little bit in high school and then got into trouble real early on, you know, bad twin, good twin, that in 9th grade, I almost got kicked out of Punahou because of some stuff that I was doing with some other kids and just, you know, just acting out. And it kind of scared me straight, at least to a degree. And I stayed away from all of the drugs and alcohol that were going on in high school. And there was, you know, not a ton, but there was, you know, it's a prep school. There was marijuana and cocaine and drinking. And so I poured myself into athletics, and it was a nice escape for me, and was good enough that it kind of held my attention. And then we got up to BYU, and I think there were a lot of things that played into it, but I think that expectation that Tao's talking about, and then I think most of us have in the back of our minds this dark kind of voice of doubt that you wrestle with. And I remember being at BYU and going to practice, and I was, you know, accustomed to being the star on the team, and
Okay.
I remember coming to practice and they asked me to hold a blocking bag, and I was like, what? What is going on?
Oh, okay.
And as Tal was talking about, you're dealing with guys that are monsters at this level. And
Yeah.
you come in and you think, okay, I'm the leading rusher in the state of Hawaii. And you come in, everybody is the leading whatever from wherever they came from.
True.
Every single one of them.
Yeah.
And so it's just, then
It's a lot of comparison.
when those things happen, then that voice in the back of my head that said, man, maybe you're just not good enough. Or you're not as good as you thought you were. And so you start to get these doubts that creep in. And it's rough. And it's a hard thing to deal with emotionally.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'd had plenty of injuries in my high school career, but I'd never been prescribed narcotics. And at BYU, I had a minor injury that I can't even recall what it was. And the protocol was that you get injured and then you talk to the coach. The coach says, go talk to the trainer. The trainer says, okay, so, go meet with the doctor after practice. And then, and so I did that, and then they wrote a prescription for me right there. And then they actually had a mobile pharmacy that was inside the training room where you would take the prescription that the doctor wrote, or the doctor would just send it right over to the pharmacy, and you'd pick up your medication for the day and you'd go home.
Okay.
And it's anti-inflammatories, muscle relaxers, and narcotics. And back then, they were, we didn't know what we know now about narcotic painkillers, about opioids. And so
okay.
I have this injury, I get prescribed muscle relaxer, anti-inflammatory, and Percocet, which is an opioid. And I don't know what it is, and I remember going back to John Hall at Helaman Halls, and one of the older players saw that I had these little manila envelopes where they put your medication in. They said, "What'd you get?" And I said, "Well, I told him what I got." And he probably didn't even pronounce it right, but he's like, "Oh man, it's good stuff." I'm like, "Okay." So he said, so he tells me what to take, and I remember I took a Percocet and a Soma, which is a muscle relaxer. And I can still remember where I was in John Hall. I was kind of in the entrance by the mud benches and kind of the common area when those chemicals hit my bloodstream. Mm-hmm. And when they hit my bloodstream, it changed my life. I was just like, holy cow, like this is amazing. And all the doubt and insecurity was washed away. And I was like, man, I'm okay. Like, I'm okay. Wow. And for me, that was my chemical reaction to the opioids, right, to the narcotics. And I should have known, I know now as a counselor and having, been schooled in how addiction impacts or affects, us biologically, that should have been a red flag, that I had that type of response to it. And it didn't happen overnight. But it was one of those things where your brain has this euphoric recall, and for me that became the answer, not to my physical pain but to my emotional pain.
Okay.
And my brain recognizes that, and it says, now next time we have emotional pain, well, I got the solution for that. Mm-hmm. Like I know what to do. And so over the next several years, and then that separation that I had with Tao when he went on his mission. Like, whew, man, like that was, for me, talk about being all alone for the first time in your life. That's where I felt, and, so that emotional pain, like, well, I know how to fix that. I know how to be okay. And it was, I'm going to get these drugs, and these drugs are going to help me get through it. So,
wow.
That was the start. And what they say about drugs and alcohol, and I say this when I'm talking to clients all the time, it says, we don't use because we're stupid. Like, we use because it works. Yeah. Yeah. Until it stops working.
I love how you said, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
I can recognize and appreciate that here you have this comparison, you're stressed, mm-hmm. your brother's taken from you, but I have a solution.
Yeah.
And I think that we can recognize that.
Yeah. And it becomes, for people that struggle or suffer from the disease of addiction, drugs and alcohol are not the problem. Drugs and alcohol were the solution to all of our problems. Oh. And you can see that the way that my brain was understanding that, okay, for me, when I have stress, when I have anxiety, when I have depression, when I have, these feelings of insecurity, yeah. I have a solution. Okay, it's going to be these drugs. And then they work until they stop working. When they stop working, then it becomes that's why they talk about the insanity of addiction, is because for addicts and alcoholics, you keep on trying to make it work. It's like, I got to figure out a way to make this thing work again. And at that point, you've lost, it's not going to work anymore. But
you think the solution is more.
Yeah.
And going back to what Alema had said, at that time at BYU, this is in the mid-'80s, they didn't know what they know now about the addictive the addictive nature.
Sure.
Not
Yeah.
as much as they know.
Yeah.
And then now we're learning more about how the pharmacies were complicit in pushing these. They did know,
Yeah.
and they were pushing it, knowing that there's a lot of money to be made here if we can get the country hooked on
Yeah.
on these
Oh, dear.
medications. But that was not, so there was no malicious intent at BYU. It
Yeah.
was, this is how we treated these things.
Yeah.
But then it quickly, for somebody like Alema, and we have similar chemical makeup, so for me, it was a similar experience in taking these medications, that it becomes your coping device. And at first it becomes kind of recreational escape, and then it becomes like what you need all the time. But, what happened with Alema is then he got a back injury, and things kind of got kicked into. It's always helpful if you have a legitimate reason to be taking them.
Okay.
And so maybe you can tell a little bit about.
Yeah, you can just, you're able to justify that. And even considering back then, for anybody that was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? And for the majority of the audience, you can maybe relate, is that, okay, we don't drink and we don't smoke.
Correct.
Right? But there's nothing in the word of wisdom that says we don't take medication that's prescribed by the doctor. So,
Right.
So even though that can be even more injurious than anything that you might find at the liquor store, there was this feeling of, but this is not bad, right?
Not
and I don't have
that
to talk to my
bad.
bishop about it.
Right. Oh, okay.
And so I can alleviate, so I can actually get high, but not have to feel guilty because the doctor prescribed it, and there's nothing in the word of wisdom that says anything about opioids.
So I'm trying to understand what's that like. So I'm putting myself in my own personal story of when I have a headache. First thing I do is go to the Excedrin, and I know if I wait for 15 minutes, I'm going to be okay. I can take on the day, right? And where you were in a place of, this removes me from my own emotional turmoil, and this feels good. When did you decide, or when did you discover that you were addicted?
The disease of addiction is very, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. And it is. It's very deceptive. And it's one of, if not the only diseases that will try to convince you that you don't have it. So coming to that awareness, and I deal with new clients that are coming into treatment all the time as a professional now, and seeing it, it's like, man, why didn't you stop like 10 years ago?
Okay.
Because for me, the evidence was piling up, and different things that were happening in my life that would indicate that I had a problem. But I couldn't see it, or I didn't want to see it. And so the addicted brain wants to minimize and justify or blame somebody else and find ways like, this is okay, like this behavior is okay. It's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
But I had an experience when I was done playing. I had my second back surgery after my senior season, and I was getting pain medication from multiple doctors. And I went to fill a prescription at the pharmacy, one of the drive-through pharmacies in Provo, and I had altered the prescription, so it's a forgery charge. And I had given the prescription to the pharmacist. The pharmacist looked at the prescription, then looked at me, and then looked at the prescription, and looked at me, and said, "Hang on a second." I'm scared, and I panicked, and so I drove off, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm in trouble, and the DEA is going to be busting down my door, and I was scared, and I called our trainer at BYU, and I was still on scholarship at BYU, even though I was done playing. And I said, hey, his name's George Curtis, a beautiful man. I said, George, I have a problem. I need to get into treatment. I think I have a pain management problem. So I didn't think I was an addict. I thought I'm not managing my pain properly.
Okay.
And so I ended up getting into a treatment center. This is in 1989, in Orem. And I remember going through 28 days of treatment and getting off drugs for the first time in a long time. And still not believing that. I remember being in that facility, listening to other people's stories and thinking, man, like this person is really sick. And it's a good thing they're here because they have a serious problem.
Wow.
And, but I didn't relate to that. Like, that's me. It's like, man, you guys really.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm glad you're here. Like, I'm glad you're getting the help that you. It was that.
I mean, how often in life are we that way? I wish you were here listening to this lesson.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I need. Oh, okay.
Right. And so it took multiple trips through treatment after that for me to finally get sober for the first time. And by that time, I'm married and have a little girl who's like 2 months old.
Oh.
And for one of those moments for me outside, I should have stopped way back when that happened, that, passing that, trying to pass that prescription. But I remember I continued to use, and things continue to spiral out of control. I get married. My first child is being born, obtaining ET, and I can't stop using. I remember going to the hospital for my daughter to be born and thinking, okay, you got to stop, man. Like, this has got to be it. And I was hanging on. I was going through withdrawal as my daughter's being born, and I had some pills at a pharmacy, and I remember trying to get away from the hospital so I could go fill that prescription and hating myself for it. But at that point, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stop. Wow. There was nothing that could have made me stop at that point, And there's plenty of those types of experiences where, well, I'll stop when my daughter's born, or I'll stop when I get married, or I'll stop when I get this job, or I'll stop, it's always when, and it just never happens because the drugs and the alcohol are that powerful.
Now, Alema, you've had some pretty personal experiences then with recognizing some of the pains of this addiction. When did you hit, would you say, rock bottom?
Addiction is one of those things that it's always trying to convince you that you don't have it. It's not that big of a problem. You minimize and you justify. It's not that bad. Mm-hmm. And so, it's an interesting question that you're asking. Is like, when did you hit rock bottom? It's like, well, which one? Because I can think of just all of these different times in my life where it should have been enough. Yeah. Should have been enough to motivate you to change.
Right.
And for, but it wasn't. Yeah. And so whether it was, the birth of my daughter, my oldest, who's 30 now, and getting, going to the hospital, and I remember I was trying to taper off of opioids, which is not an easy thing, and it's very uncomfortable, but I wanted to be sober when my daughter was born. And in the end, I was sober, but I was sick, because I was going through withdrawals. And I was thinking, okay, this has got to be it. Like, you got to stop. Or even going back to the time when I, passed what was, or got caught for what was one of many forged prescriptions. Like, that should have been enough. And being at the hospital with my daughter, and they had to put her in a little incubation thing because she had a high white blood cell count. And I remember looking through the glass at her and just having this overwhelming desire to change, but I couldn't. I had some pills that were at a pharmacy, and I remember figuring out a way to get away from the hospital for an hour so I could go pick up these pills. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm sick right now because I'm going through withdrawal. Let me get these pills, and then I'll be okay, and then I'll taper off this prescription. So you go pick up 100 pills and you say, okay, I'm going to now taper myself off of this, and that goes on forever, and you're doing that forever. So that should have been another rock bottom. And then shortly after that, my daughter was maybe 2 months old, and I had written a bad check to fill a prescription, knowing that at some point this is like, I'm going to be found out here, but it doesn't matter. Like I right now, I'll figure out how to deal with that later.
Wow.
But when my wife finally found out about it through the bank, she had enough. She said, "That's it." Like I was at work at the Olive Garden where I was working, coming out of college, and she said, "You need to come home, pack your stuff, and get out of here." And I remember. Normally she would pick me up. She said, "You're just going to walk home." So I walk home from the Olive Garden, and I'm thinking maybe I should just throw myself in front of this traffic. And I didn't know what to do. And I got home, and my wife at the time, she's yelling at me. I mean, just screaming at me. And my daughter is in her bassinet in the bedroom. She's crying, and I'm having this conscious understanding, this is really bad, Alema. This is a problem. And all I could think of is that I had 60 pills stashed behind the washing machine in the apartment. And all I could think of is how am I going to get to that before I'm kicked out? Oh. And to reflect on that and think that's crazy. And I love my daughter. And I don't want to hurt my kids. But those are the things that we as alcoholics and addicts do that you can look at, for me to look at that today and say, this is why I work a program, so that I don't ever do that again or anything like that again. And that wasn't the end. There were plenty of other experiences that I dragged my family through.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
And you were on your mission. You were witnessing this in your brother, right?
Well, when I was on my mission in Tahiti, and so I didn't even know a lot of what was going on. I do remember I heard that Alema had gotten he got a pretty serious back injury, required surgery. Mm-hmm. And I remember praying that the energy that was necessary for him to make it through surgery would be taken from me and given to him. I remember that, but when I got back so all this stuff is happening after I got back from my mission, the stuff that Alema's talking about. What I appreciate him describing this in so much detail is there are so many people that they see the behavior of an addict and they're like, what is wrong with you, right?
Why are you acting like this? Why are you
and
making
like Alema just said,
like this?
Right? It's not that he didn't love his daughter. We love our children. There's something else going on, and maybe Alema can get into it. There's something else that's going on that it has basically hijacked your brain, and so you start doing things. And this is again, hopefully, so that people who are not addicts but deal with addicts can maybe have some. I don't know if you want to call it sympathy, but some understanding that this is truly a disease, and so that's one of the things that Alema shares that I think is really, really important for people to understand. And his sharing that experience is a good opening to helping to. I mean, because what he was doing, that's crazy, right?
Yeah, but to be thinking of pills.
Yeah, addicts do crazy things.
Over family members.
And people who don't understand them just say, why don't you stop? Why don't you just stop? And especially, and a lot of times it's your kids, right? Because they're the ones that are like, why do you love these drugs more than you love me? And you don't. That's not real. You don't. But it has taken over, and that's the hardest thing. Is that, that they don't get it. They don't understand. All they can understand is what they see, and what they see is that you have made a choice of this over them, And so maybe Alema,
I think if you look at the tools of the adversary and what the goal of the adversary is to hijack this journey that we're on, which is all about our agency and using our agency to make choices, good or bad, and then having a repentance process when we make mistakes. But I think one of the greatest tools that the adversary has is addiction, because it robs you of your agency. And even though you may have started to use drugs or alcohol as a choice, there comes a certain point in the addict where it switches over and you've lost your ability to choose. When for the addict wakes up in the morning and doesn't think, I wonder if I'll use today. The addict wakes up in the morning and it's like, I've got to use today.
It's not even.
It's not a choice.
Yeah.
It's like, and I hope I don't hurt the people that I love in the process. But if I do, then the only way to get through that kind of shame of having done those things, well, there's two ways. You stop, you repent, and you ask for a mighty change of heart. But the other way that most of us choose is just keep using. I just blot it out.
It's easier that way.
Yeah.
Wow. So you have this addiction. You recognize that it's become a problem in your life. We have incidences in life where a hero will come in and step in and show us the way. Who was an influence for you on your recovery path?
I had people in my life that were amazing, and would jump around a little bit in my story. I finally got sober after that experience with my young daughter when she was 2 months old. So I get sober, and then I'm sober for 8 years, and I come up here to Channel 5, and I'm working at KSL in '96, and then around 2000, after being sober for 8 years, I start, I end up relapsing, and but I had people in my life. Visa Kahema was one of them. Craig Bolerjack was one of them. Scott Kinney, who is a friend in recovery, was one of them. And then, the guy that became a hero for me was this kid named Charles Kahalehoi. He was this huge Hawaiian kid that I went through treatment with in '92. And so I'm in Hawaii, and I'm this prep school kid that's coming back, and my father's relatively famous. Certainly in the islands, he's a big deal because he was on Hawaii Five-0 and all of those things.
Okay.
And so I end up in treatment, and the treatment facility that I'm in is the majority of the population is people that are court ordered, coming from prison, and you finish part of your sentence by doing this 2-year program.
Okay.
And then and so almost everybody I was in treatment with was coming from prison and from a very rough background, and we were upper middle class growing up. And I end up partnered up with this guy named Charles Kahalehoi, who was from Waianae, and which is a real rough part of the west side of Oahu. If you ever watch Dog the Bounty Hunter, half the time they're at Miley Beach, which is right down this guy's street.
Oh, wow.
And that's where they're picking up all the the crack and meth addicts.
Yeah.
And we forged this friendship that was remarkable. He could barely read, and one of our assignments was to find somebody and read the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous with them. So I'm reading with him, and and we forged this beautiful friendship. Two unlikely, characters, and we became close friends. And so after I had gone through that program in '92 and 1996, I ended up coming back to Utah, but I stayed in touch with him. Then when I was going through this relapse in 2000 through 2002, which goes into the 2002 Olympic Games.
Okay.
My wife says, okay, that's enough. She leaves me. By then I have 3 kids.
Oh, wow.
And I am, just in an opioid induced haze going through the Olympics.
Which is like the pinnacle of your career.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the Jazz had been to the finals twice. The Winter Olympics comes into Salt Lake. and as a sportscaster for the NBC affiliate, right? And the Olympics is
Yeah.
on NBC. This should be
This should be the launching point, right?
Yes.
For my career.
Yeah.
And, you know, for various reasons, most of them having to do with just my resentment towards, you know, a situation that had happened at work where they promoted somebody instead of me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, this is complete. This is just not fair.
Yeah.
Which is, and they say about resentment for the alcoholic and the addict, resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And the reason why is because what we recognize in recovery is that the real recovery is God coming in and taking your addiction from you. And so if I don't have God, then I will relapse for sure. And it's like guaranteed because I don't have what is my protection against this disease.
Wow.
And when we become resentful, what we effectively do, and it says this in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says when we harbor such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. And the insanity of alcohol returns, and we drink again. Mm-hmm. And for us to drink is to die. But shutting ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit, meaning that I because I was so upset about this thing that had happened, and I thought that it wasn't fair.
Yeah.
I was mad at God, mm-hmm. and so I decided, you know what, God, that's not the way I wanted it to go, and so because you're not doing it the way I want you to do it, I'm gonna do it now. And that ended up being a 2-year relapse that I was knocking on death's door. By the end of that relapse, I'm down at Pioneer Park buying heroin. And I've lost my family again. But to bring Charles Kahalihoy back into this picture, my mom had remembered Charles, and so she reached out to him as I'm, you know, in the depths of despair, and I'm trying to see my children, my 3 kids, and I'm strung out, and I can't stop. And she reached out to Charles, and I remember I was staying at her house, and she came into the room there I was staying in, and she had the phone in her hand, and she handed it to me. I said, what's this? And she said, just listen. And so I said, hello, and it was Charles Kahalihoy. And he said, Alema, what are you doing? And I remember thinking, I don't know. And I don't know what to do. And he said, either you get on a plane and you fly back here to Sand Island, because he had become a counselor at Sand Island. You come back, or I'm going to come up there and I'm going to kick your butt. And he said, in, you know, a little more rough terms than that. And miraculously, somehow, I got on a plane and I with a half a gram of heroin in my pocket.
Wow.
And I flew back to Hawaii. And the guy that had been my running mate in treatment when I had gone through in 92, 10 years later, now this guy's my counselor. Mm. And I learned some valuable lessons that I didn't know that I needed. And thank goodness I didn't die in that relapse. And I always tell people when I see repeat customers, as you might refer to it, that have come through a program and then they go out and they relapse, they come back again. And whenever I see them, I'm like, I'm glad you're alive. I'm glad you're here. And that's, to me, one of the things that I try to share when it comes to this recovery thing is that recovery is hard. And recovery for an alcoholic or an addict it's very challenging. And one of the scary things is that if you do mess up, like now what? Like what do I do? Mm-hmm. For me, I was 8 years sober and I'm starting to relapse and I'm thinking, uh-oh, like what do I do? Well, I can't tell anybody. Right. Because everybody thinks that I'm sober.
They believe in me.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of that is just the ego thinking that it's that important, right? Mm-hmm. And so trying to help people understand that the best thing that you can do if you mess up is reach out. talk to somebody. And so I have people in my life today where I can reach out and I can be honest with them when I'm struggling or having a hard time, or and I can be honest with them. And that's an important part. But the biggest thing that I learned from going back to Sand Island in 2002 and meeting with Charles, and as I was able to get back on my feet in recovery in that program at Sand Island, was the importance of step 12 in the 12-step program, which is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We carry the message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. And what it really, one of the main focuses of that is to carry the message and to share our experience, strength, and hope.
Yeah.
And when I got back to Sand Island 10 years after I'd gone through before, there were a certain number of alumni, guys that were still sober, that were still coming around the program, including Charles. And I remember being curious. I'm like, what did these guys do that I wasn't doing? I thought I was doing this thing right. And to a man, every one of them was carrying the message. Like, they were working with other alcoholics. And I thought, well, I'm the Elders Quorum president, so that doesn't that cover it? And it's like, no. Like, you need to go to the people that need to hear this message, that need to hear this message of hope. Like, that's your work.
Yes.
Go carry the message to them.
Right.
And so for me, from that point in 2002, I've made it a point, and I haven't been perfect along the way. And when I have fallen, it's been because I stopped carrying the message. Like, something else became more important. It's like, I don't have time to do that. And one of the great benefits for me in my life today is that I went back and got my substance use disorder counseling degree,
Yeah.
and I work as a counselor. And so I get to carry this message at our Do Recovery in Utah County in Provo, and that saves my life every day, because my thing when it comes to recovery is, what my understanding of recovery is recovery is being in tune with God and what his purpose is. And so recovery is being in harmony with the purpose of our creation.
Yeah.
And I don't always know what that is. I don't think any of us know all the time what that is. But I know when I'm carrying the message to somebody else about this remarkable thing that God does for us, that he can heal us. When I'm carrying that message, at that moment, I'm doing exactly what I was created to do. And so the more time I can spend doing that, the more I'm in harmony with the purpose of my creation.
You found your testimony through
Yeah.
the test.
Yeah.
That is so powerful. What have you done with this testimony in learning that you have to share the message?
Well, I think that's the big part of it is now, if anybody ever asks me to come speak or to come do something, or has to do with recovery, I'm always going to say yes. And they say in recovery that you got to build your life around your recovery and not your recovery around your life. What that means is like when somebody comes into treatment and we introduce them to, okay, this is the program and this is what we do. It's not a diet. It's not like something I'm going to do for a little while.
Okay.
And hopefully that I get the results that I want. And then, like most diets, then I'm going to relapse.
Okay.
And so it's like, well, how do I stay sober? How do I stay stopped? Mm-hmm. Because alcoholics and addicts, we stop all the time. It's like, how do you help me not pick up again?
Yeah.
Right? Whether I'm stopping for 1 hour or for 10 days. And so the way that we do that is that we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. That's a life change, right? That's not a some sort of behavioral manipulation.
Yeah.
That is, as King Benjamin's people experienced, a mighty change of heart, where I no longer have the disposition to do evil. I mean, that's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And so the testimony is that if you will commit to that and give this to God. He will take it. And I remember hearing that kind of thing when I was trying to get sober. And these guys would come in and they'd share their story and they'd talk about how their life is so good now. And they don't even think about using. And I remember thinking, this guy is such a liar. I'd be sitting listening to these guys and I'm like why do they bring these guys in here to talk to us? They just lie like this. I said, this guy is either lying or he never had good drugs. Because there's no way that if you were like me,
yeah,
that you'd be sitting there like that. That's just not possible.
Yeah.
I just didn't think that was real.
Uh-huh.
Until it happened to me. And I sat in those meetings long enough and listened to those guys long enough to be willing to say, you know what? Maybe that could happen for me. And if you continue to do that, if you hang on, then that moment will come. And it was a powerful moment for me. I just couldn't imagine going through a day where I wasn't obsessing or thinking about using. And even when I wasn't using, I was thinking, well, man, if I could just get 30 days and get my tolerance down, then I'll use again. Or like all of these crazy thoughts that we have as alcoholics and addicts. I thought, I'll never be free of that. And I was just continually encouraged, like, bro, just hang in there, man. Just hang in there and work this program. And so I did. And I remember I had been there for maybe somewhere between 60 and 90 days. And this is a 9-month on-facility program. And I was kneeling down to say my prayers. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh, I didn't think about using today. It blew my mind. And for me, it was like the miracle. This is the miracle. And so the message that we carry and the reason we do is so that somebody out there that is watching this and saying, this guy is such a liar. There's no way that can happen. Having lived the experience that I'm living, it's like, hang in there. Just hang in there. And work this program and these steps the best that you can. And I promise you that if you do that, that God will take this and you will have a mighty change of heart. And this obsession, this disposition to do evil or to do drugs and alcohol will be removed. It happens. It absolutely happens. I testify of the truthfulness of that.
So beautiful.
Amen.
Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing your personal story and hopefully helping us to understand where you were with this. Please share with us, how can we hear more about what you're doing with the A-Game Institute?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that. You know, the A-Game Institute is something that was kind of born out of this twin relationship that we have. And we were looking for ways to kind of apply the principles that we have learned over years of for me, studying athletes as a broadcaster, being former athletes, talking with some of the the greatest coaches that have ever coached in sports, and even having played for a Hall of Famer in Lavelle Edwards, and then through our experience in recovery, my experience as a licensed counselor, you start to see patterns, and that there are things that successful people are doing. Yeah. And I think that we're honest enough to recognize that we didn't come up with this. Like, these are not like, hey, I just got this brand new thing. Like, you probably never heard about it before. Yeah. And the truth is, all of these principles have been in existence since the days of Adam and Eve. Okay. Literally, right, from those principles of honesty or humility or obedience and patience and the different things that are part of, whether it's hope, which is one of the presentations that we do, that takes you alongside kind of this journey that we've been on, talking about my recovery, but going from rock bottom to rock solid, the doctrine of hope, and hope is an acronym. and going through those principles, or the 7 C's of success, which is 7 different principles that start with C, and with really a goal of being able to impact culture in a business or in a family or in an organization or personally, and then the A-game philosophy, which is the original part of the A-game Institute, which is 5 principles that all start with A. That again is part of a leadership training program, and so we try to carry that message, but hopefully I think we carry that message with passion, and a little entertainment value along the way, coming from the backgrounds that we come from in media and broadcasting, and a father who was in show business for a good portion of his life, and having grown up in that environment. The A-game Institute is kind of an evolution of the things that we've learned over the years from our parents, from people that have come into our lives, and it's a project that we get to do together.
Yeah.
So,
oh, that's so powerful. So who is the A-game Institute for?
Well, for anybody that's looking for leadership training and is looking for, like, okay, we've hit a certain plateau, and maybe we're even doing very well, but we're looking for that thing that's going to take us to the next level, or take us over the top, and looking for a program that you can implement that you can sustain. As I was talking about what recovery is, it's being able to sustain that. Even as a counselor working with clients, I'm constantly talking about practical application. It's like, it's great if we can keep you sober while you're here in treatment for 30, 60 days, right? But what we really want is for you to be able to take what you've learned here and apply it in your life on the outside. So there's plenty of motivational or leadership training type of programs that might get you motivated for a period of time. It's like we're trying to build sustainable programs that you can continually go back and reflect on. How are we doing on this? Okay, and understanding, okay, if we're not hitting our mark, where are we deficient, and going back and addressing those things.
So in your opinion, in your experience, what is your definition of success?
Success to me is this: we're here. A lot of times, I'll talk to youth athletic groups, and I was like, what's the opposite of winning? And the most common response is going to be losing.
Losing.
And the answer is no, that the opposite of winning is not losing. The opposite of winning is quitting. And half the battle is showing up. Maybe more than half. Certainly on certain days, it's probably 98% of the battle is just showing up.
Yes.
With all the negativity, whether it's self-inflicted or otherwise, that just keeps showing up. And we do that because we believe that there is hope, and that I believe this, that God loves us. I mean, really, I tell people, God is nuts about me. And I didn't feel that for a long time. And there's still times when I don't necessarily feel that. But I come back to that principle, that God loves me. He's nuts about me and wants the best for me. And so let me partner with him today.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for giving us hope and a message of understanding. And just thank you for being alive. Thank you for being here. If you've enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, share, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. Please comment, because I would love to hear about what you think and what you want to see in the future. I'm no therapist, but I am your host, Stephanie Goodman. For more information about this recovery program, visit theagameinstitute.com.